So the government says we're still on track for remaining restrictions to be lifted on July the 19th. But ahead of that, there are a few tricky weeks ahead, certainly in our schools. Last week, more than 250,000 children were absent from schools in the UK due to the coronavirus, the majority of which were self-isolating due to being a close contact of someone with the virus. Yesterday, the government signalled the current system in England's schools, where groups of children have to self-isolate if just one tests positive for coronavirus, could be changed in the autumn. So what's the picture like locally? Well, Damien McNulty is executive member for Cheshire and Merseyside for the teaching union, the NASUWT. He's also a primary school teacher in Knowsley and joins me now. Very good morning to you, Damien.
Good morning, Paul.
Right, first of all then, what's the picture like at the moment? What kind of numbers are we seeing?
Okay, well, across the Liverpool City region, we're back to the kind of numbers that we were seeing in October time. Liverpool itself, Liverpool City Council, had over 7,500 children last week self-isolating, and the positive case numbers have increased by over 50% in primary schools of children testing positive. We've got 150 children testing positive in primary, 160 almost in secondary, and staff-wise, that's in the 20s of staff that are testing positive across those settings.
So it's alarming, isn't it? You would say.
Well, sadly, it is, and that's replicated. I would say those figures are broadly replicated across all those local authorities, and it's deeply upsetting for teachers who have worked throughout. Schools, let's not forget, have remained open throughout, and teachers have worked tremendously hard, not just in the secondary schools, where teachers for the last few months have been extremely hardworking in relation to teacher assessed grades for year 11 and year 13 children, and sadly, we're starting to go back to where we were, as I say, in the second wave in October, and the third wave. And the government's messaging that we're hearing over the last few days certainly has the whiff of where we were mid-December, where we were told we'd be able to celebrate Christmas with our families. Let's hope that we don't find ourselves with a massive increase in cases continuing in the coming weeks before schools close.
This can't continue, can it? Not, and certainly not the rules with isolation as they are at the moment. You know, one child sadly testing positive for COVID can mean that 30-odd children are all out isolating. It's just, it's not workable, is it?
Well, the reality is, of course, and we all know this, that the incubation period for someone that may have been in contact with someone with coronavirus is between 7 and 10 days. The alternative would be to allow the children to continue to mix while a classmate or someone they've been in close contact with is at home with a positive test, and I think we'd be looking at exponential growth of cases within schools.
But I suppose it comes down to the definition of a close contact, doesn't it? I mean, anecdotally, I've heard of stories where a child is having to isolate despite being okay in the same classroom, but on the other side of the class to a child. You can understand the frustration with this, can't you?
I can certainly understand parents being frustrated. There's over 3,500 primary school children this time last week at Liverpool that were asked to self-isolate. Now, that's potentially 3,500 families that have had to arrange for mum or dad or someone to be at home with the children. But let's be clear, the Delta variant, which accounts for almost 100% of positive cases in the UK now, is extremely virulent compared to where we were back in the autumn term and also back in the spring term with the Alpha variant, or what was previously referred to as the Ken variant, much more transmissible and transmissible. Not necessarily by contact of tables, light switches, door handles. It's airborne transmission.
Yeah. I mean, the front page of The Guardian this morning, Damien, is saying that you will no longer automatically have to isolate after contact with a positive COVID case when the schools return in September. That's what they're expected to announce, the government. I'm sensing from what you've said so far that you would be very, very uncomfortable with that then.
Well, we need to see the scientific evidence. What we know is that a number of education authorities around the world are taking really positive cases in relation to airborne transmission. For example, in New York, they're putting in air filtration systems into all classrooms to scrub and clean the air within the classroom. So that would be one way of reducing the dose. And let's make no mistake here. The UK, the NHS have been absolutely fantastic with the rollout of the vaccination program. But last week, sadly, tragically, for the 117 people who had died across England, over 50 of those people had had a double vaccination. So jabs aren't immunity for everyone. 40 to 50% of the people, unfortunately, have passed away that have been vaccinated. We're seeing children, 1 in 10 children that have tested positive for coronavirus having long-term COVID symptoms. And those have potentially life-changing impacts for those young people in the weeks, months and years to come.
We're still really waiting for the final advice, aren't we, on whether we should be vaccinating under 18s. There has been reports that there's a window during the school holiday to vaccinate over 16s before the return to school. Is that a way out of this, do you think? If it's safe, get the kids vaccinated, particularly secondary school children?
Well, certainly the scientific evidence is clear that vaccinations do help break the transmission and also significantly reduce the serious symptoms that anyone may experience. But it isn't a magic wand. And the key thing is to break the transmission rates down. We've been told by this government that we have a world-beating track and trace system. Over £37 billion has been spent on it. Well, really, if that's the case, I think we should be doing much, much better as a country in relation to that. And we know that locally, public health teams are working tremendously hard on track and trace to break those transmission chains.
The line just went a little bit dodgy there. Hopefully, can you still hear me, Damien?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, good. On the catch-up program that we've heard so much about. I mean, there's various figures being bandied around when it comes to how far children have fallen behind, particularly perhaps in more deprived areas. Where does all this leave any plans for a catch-up program for children who've already fallen behind?
Well, again, the evidence is crystal clear that areas of the highest social deprivation have been the worst impacted in relation to COVID-19 in terms of transmission, in terms of positive cases, and consequently, the disruption to schools in relation to self-isolation have been tremendously higher in those areas. The government, compared to other countries, have spectacularly failed to do anything meaningful in relation to funding a recovery plan. Their own appointed czar for education recovery, Sir Kevin Collins, resigned a few weeks ago when the government, it sounds like a lot of money, and genuinely £1.5 billion for education recovery is a lot of money, but that works out at about £50 per pupil. In the United States of America, not known for its public sector, they're funding education recovery at a tune of £1,500 per pupil. It's transformational. £50 per child is, in most primary schools, for example, it wouldn't even be an additional teaching assistant for 12 months. It's to be frank, pathetic, and it doesn't go far enough for schools to bridge those gaps.
And we shouldn't forget the children in all of this. And I know you wouldn't by any means. You would acknowledge that. I think you and I probably had a conversation about this time last year, saying it's going to be a strange end to the academic year, particularly for kids who are, maybe going from year 6 into year 7. And yet here we are again. We can't underestimate the mental health impact, can we?
No, absolutely not. You're dead right, Paul. And, as a primary school teacher, I know the things that children look forward to, as well as their parents and the wider community at this time of year, are things like sports days and celebration assemblies, particularly for those year 6 children, but also for those other children in school who are making that the big move internally from from a year 2 class into the juniors, perhaps from school-based nurseries into reception classes. And of course, schools are continuing to do those celebrations and have those events with the children only. It's unfortunate, but understandable why we can't involve the parents in those. I know colleagues in secondary schools, particularly school leaders, are extremely frustrated at the last minute kind of news from I'm going to say guidance from government, but the Public Health England have given a very clear steer, and collectively the Liverpool City Region Authority have acted swiftly and consistently about messaging around bringing those children together into the secondary schools. It's too big a risk. There'd be too much impact on the children and their health and the staff in those schools. But colleagues will move heaven and earth, like they did last September, for those children who will be making that big step from primary school to secondary school and making sure they feel welcome and engaging with parents virtually. We have a plan, we have a formula that worked last year, and that will be replicated in the sort of the autumn term again for those children.
And I'm sure you are looking forward to having a bit of a break over the summer, but in the back of your mind, are you already concerned, worried, bracing yourself for September?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a number of factors that the government have control over that they're extremely unclear and unhelpful about in relation to education recovery, and we don't believe as a national union that they're putting the needs of children first. For example, the Education Secretary said that phonics testing for our year 1 children has been cancelled for this summer, but it's okay, we can do it in the autumn term. Ofsted inspections of schools is continuing at a pace and will continue again in September time. And just think of that disruption. I know a couple of head teacher colleagues who've been very ill in the last few weeks, and senior leaders as well as teachers. It has a huge impact. I mean, the government really needs to get its priorities right. Let schools focus on the mental health, the well-being, the educational recovery of their young people without layering other unnecessary bureaucracy and pressures on schools that they could well do without, to allow them to focus on their key job of working with those young people and families.
Damien McNulty, thank you very much for joining me this morning.